A man sits in a cabin by the fire, his heart filled with the painful memories of the past. Outside, the snow falls incessantly. A girl struggles to trudge through the snow, a wounded German Shepherd puppy in her arms, followed by 4 other German Shepherd puppies. They seem to be searching for a chance at survival rather than an escape. The moment the girl knocks on the door. Seeing the puppies, he finds a reason to continue fighting. Before we begin, please let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe for more. Snow swallowed the Wyoming mountains without pause, turning roads into white scars and the forest into a single, breathing shadow, where distance vanished and sound dissolved into wind. Michael Hayes lived where maps stopped being useful. His cabin sat near an abandoned mining road, half buried by drifts, its timber walls darkened by age and isolation. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the dense build of a man shaped by discipline rather than comfort. His hair, once black, was now cut short and streaked with gray at the temples. A trimmed beard framed a square jaw, marked by an old fracture that never healed quite straight. His eyes, steel blue and perpetually alert, belonged to someone who never fully left a battlefield. Years as a Navy SEALK 9 handler had trained his body to react before thought, but retirement had stripped away structure, leaving only silence and memory. He had chosen this place deliberately. No neighbors. No cell signal unless the weather was merciful. No questions. The cabin had been a temporary winter shelter once, long before Michael bought it from a defunct mining company for almost nothing. He kept it sparse, a wooden table, a single chair, a radio he rarely turned on, and a fireplace that never went cold in winter. The absence of photographs was intentional, the absence of a dog even more so. Losing his last K9 partner during a botched extraction in Kandahar had left a fracture deeper than bone. Since then, Michael had learned to live without companionship, believing distance was safer than attachment. That same storm had turned deadly miles away. A box truck climbed the mountain road slowly, its tires screaming against black ice hidden beneath fresh snow. The vehicle carried illegal cargo 5 German Shepherd puppies destined for resale, cramped in metal crates, transported without permits or care. Inside the cab, Anna Brooks sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap. She was 26, slim to the point of fragility, with pale skin reddened by cold and stress. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot beneath a wool hat too thin for the weather. Anna had been hired under false pretenses, promised paperwork, legal transport, a paycheck she desperately needed. Her documents were taken for processing and never returned. Anna had known something was wrong the moment she smelled fear instead of hay when the cargo door opened earlier that day. The puppies were too quiet. One of them, a smaller male with a darker muzzle lay, curled awkwardly, his breathing shallow. She had spoken up once. The driver laughed, told her not to get attached, and turned the radio louder. Now, as the truck hit a hidden patch of ice, there was no time for regret. The world tilted, metal screamed, gravity disappeared. The truck slid sideways and rolled, vanishing over the embankment in a violent, breathless tumble. When Anna regained consciousness, snow poured through shattered glass. The driver was unconscious or worse, pinned by the dashboard. The smell of fuel and antifreeze burned her lungs. Training she didn't know she had took over. She crawled toward the back, hands shaking as she forced the cargo latch open. Inside, chaos. One crate had burst. Puppies cried weakly. The smallest one lay half-trapped, his front leg bent at an impossible angle, fur already stiff with cold. Anna didn't think. She wrapped him inside her coat, ignoring the pain slicing through her ribs, and urged the other four out into the snow. She ran without direction, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to put distance between herself and the wreck. The injured puppy, later she would name him Buddy, pressed against her chest, his heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. He was no more than 8 weeks old, black and tan with oversized paws and eyes dulled by shock. The other four followed in stumbling patterns, their bodies low, tails tucked, untrained and terrified. Anna slipped more than once, her breath ragged, the cold chewing through her clothes, as if she were already part of the landscape. Back at the cabin, Michael sensed the storm change before he heard anything unusual. Years of patrols had taught him that silence could carry weight. He stood from the table, boots heavy against the wooden floor, listening. Wind, snow. Then something else, a sound that didn't belong, not animal, not branch. A dull, uneven thud, followed by another. Michael's posture shifted instantly, shoulders tightening, breath slowing. His right hand hovered near the doorframe, muscle memory waking old instincts he thought had gone dormant. Outside, Anna's strength gave out. Her knees hit the snow, just short of the porch, the impact jarring the injured puppy awake. Buddy whimpered, a thin, broken sound that barely cut through the wind. The other four clustered behind her, their small bodies trembling violently. Anna raised her head and saw it, a faint amber glow bleeding through frost-coated glass. Light, not the indifferent white of snow, but the warm, human color of survival. She dragged herself forward, every movement burning, and knocked with what strength she had left. Michael opened the door slowly. Wind burst inside, scattering snow across the floorboards. Framed in the doorway was a young woman kneeling in the storm, her face hollow with exhaustion, lips blue, eyes wide and glassy, but fiercely awake. She looked smaller than she was, swallowed by layers of damp clothing. In her arms, a German shepherd puppy lay limp, chest barely moving. 4 more shapes hovered behind her, like shadows afraid to step into the light. Michael took them in with a single, practice scan injuries, threats, intent. He saw no deception, only desperation. Anna met his eyes and did not beg. She couldn't. Pride and shock held her frozen. Her gaze was steady, the kind that came from someone who had already decided not to die quietly. Michael felt an unfamiliar pressure behind his ribs. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He had seen that look before, in soldiers holding wounded partners, in dogs refusing to release a fallen handler. For a moment, the years collapsed, and he was back in the desert, choosing whether to open a door he knew would change everything. He stepped aside without speaking. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. Anna understood instantly. She crawled forward, dragging herself and the puppy across the threshold. The heat from the fire wrapped around them like a physical force. The 4 puppies followed hesitantly, nails clicking against wood, their noses low, as if the floor itself might attack them. Michael closed the door behind them, shutting out the storm with a firm, final sound. The injured puppy convulsed once in Anna's arms. Michael dropped to one knee beside them, his movements controlled, deliberate. Up close, the damage was clear hypothermia. Shock, a fractured foreleg swelling beneath the fur. He smelled blood and cold, and something else beneath it. Fear held in check by will. Anna watched him with raw intensity as he shrugged off his coat and wrapped the puppy carefully, his hands steady despite the tremor that ran through his chest. He hadn't touched a dog like this in years. "Stay awake," Michael said quietly, not sure if he meant the puppy or himself. Anna nodded, her head dipping forward as exhaustion finally claimed its due. She had made it as far as she could. The fire cracked softly, indifferent yet alive, while the storm raged on outside, erasing the wreck, the road, and every choice that had led them here. By the time the cabin settled back into silence, 5 small lives breathed unevenly on the floor, and one man stood between the past he'd been running from and a door he had chosen not to close. Outside, the snow kept falling, unaware that something had just survived it. The door closed with a dull wooden thud, shutting out the storm, but not its presence. Wind pressed against the walls as if listening, while heat from the fire began its slow, uncertain work inside the cabin. Michael Hayes stood just inside the threshold, his back still to the door, breath controlled, shoulders tight. For a few seconds he did nothing, as though waiting for an explosion that never came. The silence after danger had always unsettled him more than noise. When he finally turned, his gaze went straight to the girl slumped on the floor and the small body in her arms. Anna Brooks looked younger, up close. Her face was narrow, cheekbones sharp under pale skin scraped raw by cold wind. Her lips were cracked, a faint line of blood dried at one corner. Strands of light blonde hair had slipped loose from beneath her hat, plastered to her forehead with melted snow. She was shaking hard now, not fear alone, but shock catching up with her body. Still, her arms remained locked around the puppy, as if loosening them would mean failure. Buddy barely moved. Up close, Michael could see the uneven rise of his chest, shallow and fast, the way the small body failed to conserve heat. The puppy's fur was stiff with ice, black and tan dulled to gray. His front leg lay at an unnatural angle, swollen already, the paw twitching weakly. He smelled of metal and snow and something fragile that reminded Michael of field medics working by red light in the dark. The 4 other puppies hovered several feet away, uncertain. They were all German shepherds, roughly the same age, 7 or 8 weeks at most, but already distinct. One was larger, broad-headed, with a confident stance even in fear. Another had a narrow muzzle and constantly flicking ears, alert to every sound. The smallest female stayed closest to Anna's knee, pressing her nose into the girl's coat. None barked. Hunger and cold had taught them early to conserve energy. Michael moved at last. He crossed the room in long, measured strides and knelt beside Anna. His size was imposing up close, 6 feet 2, solid without excess, the kind of man who filled space without trying. He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around Buddy with practiced care, adjusting the fabric to protect the injured leg. His hands were rough, scarred across the knuckles, but steady. Years of handling dogs under fire had taught him where to touch, and more importantly, where not to. "He's hypothermic," Michael said quietly, voice low and even. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. Anna nodded, her head dipping once before her strength failed completely. She leaned back against the wall, eyes fluttering, breath hitching as the adrenaline drained away. Michael repositioned Buddy closer to the fire, careful not to overheat him, then stood and grabbed a bowl, filling it with lukewarm water. He set food out next, dry kibble softened with warm water, rationed carefully. The puppies approached one by one, hesitant but driven by hunger. They ate fast, too fast, then backed away, watching Michael with wide, dark eyes. He ignored them, deliberately non-threatening, his focus fixed on the injured puppy. He rubbed Buddy's chest in slow circles, feeling for rhythm, counting breaths the way he once counted seconds underwater. Anna woke with a sharp inhale. Panic flashed across her face until she realized she was inside, warm. Her eyes tracked the room, the fire, the man, the puppies, and then settled on Buddy. "I didn't steal him," she said suddenly, words tumbling out, hoarse and raw. "I swear, I tried to tell them something was wrong. They took my ID, said it was temporary. It wasn't." Her hands clenched in the blanket Michael had draped over her shoulders. The crash wasn't an accident. Michael didn't interrupt. He listened the way he had learned to listen after missions went bad, without judgment, without reassurance. Anna told him about the warehouse, the cages stacked too close together, the paperwork that never matched the dogs. She told him about the driver's phone calls in hushed tones and how she realized, too late, that the route avoided checkpoints for a reason. When she finished, her voice broke, not on fear for herself, but on guilt for the ones she couldn't save. "They'll come looking," Michael said when she fell silent. It wasn't a question. He had seen this pattern before. Different country, same logic. Loss created urgency. Illegal operations never abandoned inventory without checking. Anna nodded slowly, eyes lowering. Outside, the storm intensified, wind hammering the cabin in sudden bursts that rattled the windows. Michael moved to the small window near the sink and lifted the edge of the curtain. Snow erased the world beyond 10 feet, but he could already imagine what the storm hid. Tracks filling in, wreckage buried, evidence dissolving under white. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the warning signal that came before action. He hadn't wanted responsibility. He had chosen isolation precisely to avoid it. But responsibility had found him anyway, cold and breathing on his floor. Buddy whimpered softly. Michael crouched again, adjusting the makeshift splint he had fashioned from a wooden spoon and torn cloth. The puppy's eyes opened briefly, dark, unfocused, but alive. The sight hit Michael harder than he expected. His throat tightened. He swallowed it down, focusing on the task. "You're not done," he murmured, unsure who he was talking to. "Not tonight." Anna watched him from the wall, studying the way he worked. Efficient, calm, but weighted by something older than exhaustion. She realized then that he wasn't just helping because it was right. He was helping because not helping would break him. The fire cracked loudly, a log shifting, and both of them flinched before catching themselves. When the night settled again, the storm still raging outside, 5 puppies lay breathing in uneven but steady rhythm, and one girl slept wrapped in borrowed warmth. Michael remained awake, seated on the floor with his back to the table, eyes fixed on the door he had chosen to open. He knew now what the storm was hiding, and he knew, with the same certainty he once felt before stepping into combat, that this night was only the beginning. Morning arrived cautiously, as if the mountains themselves were unsure whether the storm had truly passed. The sky was a dull slate, the snow softened into drifting ash, and the world felt temporarily held in place. Michael Hayes stepped outside just after dawn, the door closing behind him with deliberate care. He moved differently in daylight, slower, more precise boots placed where the snow crust would not betray him. His breath hung low and steady. The abandoned mining road lay 100 yards downslope, half buried, its curves erased by white. What caught his eye wasn't the road itself, but what didn't belong to it. Tire marks, fresh, narrow, aggressive treads that cut through the snow instead of riding over it. They curved off the old route and stopped abruptly near a stand of pines. Michael crouched, fingers brushing the surface without disturbing it. Nearby, boot prints, two distinct patterns angled toward the trees and then vanished where the wind had already begun its work. He straightened slowly. This wasn't curiosity. This was retrieval. Back inside the cabin, the air smelled of ash, wet wool, and life struggling to hold on. Buddy lay where Michael had left him, wrapped and warm, but his condition had worsened. The puppy's breathing was faster now, chest fluttering beneath the blanket, his body radiating heat that felt wrong for something so small. His gums were pale. When Michael touched the injured leg, Buddy whined weakly, a thin sound that cut deeper than any alarm. Anna Brooks sat against the wall, knees drawn to her chest, watching everything. She looked marginally better, color had returned to her cheeks, but exhaustion still weighed her down. Her eyes followed Michael with a mixture of gratitude and dawning fear. When she saw his expression, the set of his jaw tightening, she knew something had changed. "They're close," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Once Michael nodded. "He's running a fever," Michael said, glancing down at Buddy. "If it spikes, circulation drops. That leg won't recover." His voice stayed even, but inside, urgency pressed against old restraint. He had seen this slope before, delay turning survivable injuries into permanent loss. He needed professional help, but not at the cost of exposure. Michael reached for the radio first, then stopped. Static would travel farther than words. Instead, he pulled a battered satellite phone from a locked drawer beneath the table, an artifact from a life he'd tried to abandon. He stepped to the far corner of the cabin, shielding the device with his body, and dialed a number he had memorized but never used. Dr. Laura Bennett answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm, grounded, the kind that carried authority without sharpness. Laura was in her mid-30s, tall and lean, with a runner's posture and weathered confidence. She had dark auburn hair usually kept in a low braid, practical rather than styled, and skin freckled by years in high-altitude sun. She ran the nearest mountain veterinary clinic, known for treating working dogs, wildlife, and the occasional stubborn rancher who trusted her more than doctors. A childhood spent caring for animals during blizzards had left her unflappable in crisis. Michael spoke in fragments, location approximate, weather constraints, injured puppy, time sensitive. He didn't explain the people, the tracks, or the risk. He didn't need to. Laura listened, asked only what mattered, and then said, "I can't reach you until the pass clears. Best case, tonight. Worst, tomorrow morning." Michael exhaled slowly. "Do what you can," she added. "Keep him warm, not hot. Minimal movement. If the fever spikes, call me back." After the call ended, Michael began changing the cabin's rhythm. He covered the windows with heavy blankets, dimmed the fire to embers, and moved the puppies away from the central room. He swept his own tracks near the door, brushed snow back into place, and led Anna and the dogs through the rear exit to test alternate paths, short looping routes that would leave confusion rather than direction. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Anna watched in silence. This version of Michael was different from the man who had opened the door the night before. He was still quiet, still controlled, but now there was purpose in every movement. She realized he wasn't hiding from the world out of fear. He was hiding because he knew exactly how dangerous it could be. "You've done this before," she said softly. Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. His scars already had. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow fell lighter now, but that only made sound carry farther. Michael returned Buddy to the warmest corner, checking the splint, adjusting the cloth. The puppy stirred, eyes flickering open briefly. Michael leaned closer, resting his forearm against the floor so his presence wouldn't loom. "Stay with me," he murmured. His voice wavered despite his control. He hated that feeling recognition turning into attachment, but he didn't pull away. Anna moved closer, offering her body heat without being asked. She cradled Buddy's head gently, tears welling but not falling. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to believe survival was possible, not just for the dogs, but for herself. She saw now that Michael wasn't saving them to feel heroic. He was saving them because once someone hadn't come back, and he refused to let that happen again. By late afternoon, the light thinned, stretching shadows across the floor. Michael checked the tracks again from the window's edge. The tire marks were softer now, filling in, but he knew better than to trust snow. He began preparing a contingency food packed, blankets rolled, a route mapped in his head to the old mining shelter farther upslope. He hoped he wouldn't need it. Hope, he knew, was dangerous. Necessary, but dangerous. As dusk settled, Buddy's fever plateaued, not rising, not falling, a fragile truce. The puppies slept in a tight cluster, breath synchronized. Anna rested against the wall, eyes closed but alert. Michael remained standing, listening to the mountain breathe. He had confirmed what the morning had warned him of. They were being searched for, and time was no longer a passive thing. Outside, the snow hid everything. Inside, Michael prepared to move. Night returned with violence. The wind rose first, low and deliberate, then the snow followed, thick and blinding, erasing the fragile calm morning had left behind, and turning the mountains into a moving wall of white. Michael Hayes didn't hesitate this time. He felt the change in pressure through the cabin walls, heard the shift in the forest's voice. This storm wasn't passing through, it was settling in. He moved with purpose, pulling on his insulated jacket, securing straps, packing only what could be carried fast. His face, rough with stubble and shadowed by firelight, was calm in the way only men shaped by crisis ever were, not fearless resolved. Anna Brooks watched him, heart hammering. She was still weak, but adrenaline sharpened her movements. Her slim frame disappeared beneath borrowed layers, her pale hands trembling as she gathered the puppies. Her eyes kept drifting to Buddy. The injured puppy lay wrapped in cloth near the fire, his breathing shallow, his body frighteningly still. "He won't make it out there," she whispered, voice breaking. Michael met her gaze. "He will," he said, not as reassurance, but as a promise he intended to keep. They left through the rear of the cabin, slipping into the storm like ghosts. Michael took point, breaking trail, his boots finding ground by instinct, alone. He carried Buddy against his chest, inside his jacket, the puppy's small body pressed directly to his skin. The other 4 puppies were bundled together in a makeshift sling Anna carried, their whimpers swallowed by the wind. Snow stung Michael's face, needles of ice cutting into old scars, but he welcomed the pain it anchored him. The forest closed around them quickly. Visibility dropped to arm's length. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Michael counted his movements the way he once counted seconds between explosions. Buddy's heartbeat fluttered beneath his palm, uneven, weakening. Michael adjusted his grip, pressing the puppy closer, his own body heat the only thing standing between life and stillness. "Stay," he murmured, breath fogging into the fur. "You stay." Halfway up the ridge, Buddy convulsed once, then went terrifyingly limp. Michael stopped instantly, dropping to one knee despite the snow piling against him. He unzipped his jacket further, skin burning as cold air rushed in, and tucked the puppy fully against his bare chest. He rubbed Buddy's side in firm, rhythmic motions, just like he had done years ago in a desert half a world away, when another dog had gone quiet in his arms under gunfire and dust. This time he refused to let the memory end the same way. Anna stood frozen, clutching the sling, tears carving hot lines down her face before freezing on her lashes. She wanted to scream, to beg, but Michael's focus was absolute. Minutes stretched, then barely a twitch, a shallow gasp. Buddy's chest lifted. Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, pressing his forehead briefly against the puppy's head. "Good," he whispered. "That's it." They moved again, slower now. The abandoned mining shelter emerged from the storm like a scar in the mountainside. A low concrete entrance half collapsed, its iron supports rusted but intact. Michael had memorized its location years ago, back when he first learned the terrain, back when planning escape routes felt safer than trusting permanence. He ushered Anna inside, sealing the opening with a canvas tarp weighted by stone. Inside, the shelter smelled of damp earth and old metal. It was cramped but mercifully still, the wind reduced to a distant howl. Michael set Buddy down on insulated ground, wrapping him in every spare layer. Anna knelt beside them, her movements careful, reverent. The other puppies huddled together, finally quiet, warmth slowly returning to their small bodies. For a moment, the world shrank to breath and heartbeat. Hours passed in fragments. Michael kept watch near the entrance, eyes narrowed, senses stretched thin. At one point, faint sounds carried through the storm engines, struggling, voices distorted by wind. He held still, muscles coiled, refusing to give them direction. The storm did what it did best. It swallowed everything. Just before dawn, the wind softened. Snow fell lighter, no longer driven sideways. Michael checked Buddy again. The fever had broken slightly, not enough to relax, but enough to hope. He pulled out the satellite phone once more, shielding the weak signal with his body. When Dr. Laura Bennett answered, her voice was tight but steady. "I'm close," she said. "The pass cleared an hour ago. I alerted county and federal wildlife enforcement. They're moving on the wreck site." Laura arrived after sunrise, her truck crawling through the last of the drifts. She stepped out wrapped in a heavy parka, auburn hair braided tight against the cold, her face pale but determined. She assessed Buddy immediately, hands efficient, eyes sharp. "You did exactly right," she told Michael, fitting a thermal wrap around the puppy's leg. "Another hour, and we'd be talking about amputation. Or worse." While Laura worked, distant sirens echoed through the valley, muted, unreal. The people who had caused all this would be handled by others. Michael felt no satisfaction in that, only relief that he hadn't had to become something else to stop them. He watched Anna as she answered questions, her voice steadier now, her spine straighter. She wasn't running anymore. As the sun climbed, the storm finally released its grip. Snow glittered across the mountains like broken glass. Buddy slept, breathing slow and deep, alive. Michael stood just outside the shelter, the cold air sharp in his lungs, and felt the weight he had carried for years shift just slightly from his shoulders. By the time they moved again, it was towards safety, not flight. Michael glanced once at the path behind them, already filling with snow, and then forward, where light waited. He hadn't planned to run that night, but when the storm came, he had done what soldiers and handlers were trained to do. He had moved, he had carried the wounded, and he had not left anyone behind. Spring arrived late in the Wyoming mountains, cautious and thin, slipping between nights that still remembered winter and mornings where meltwater traced quiet paths through the snow like second chances finding their way. Buddy healed in increments so small they were almost invisible unless you watched him every day. The swelling in his foreleg receded first, then the tremor in his step softened into a careful, stubborn walk. He was still young, barely 10 weeks when the storm broke, and his black and tan coat grew brighter as warmth returned. His eyes, once dulled by shock, followed Michael everywhere now with a devotion that felt earned rather than given. He learned the cabin sounds quickly, the scrape of a chair, the click of the latch, the soft warning in Michael's voice when the fire burned too high. Michael changed without ceremony. He never announced it, never spoke of decisions as turning points. He simply woke earlier, stayed outside longer, repaired what had been broken, and finished what had been left undone. The scar along his jaw caught more sunlight now as his beard grew out and then was trimmed again with intention. The rigidity in his posture eased. Buddy slept pressed against his leg at night, and Michael no longer woke with his fists clenched. The other 4 puppies were transferred to Cedar Ridge Animal Rescue once the roads opened. The center sat in a wide valley where winter receded faster, run by people who understood patience as a discipline. The puppies each found homes within weeks, one with a retired firefighter, another with a family whose children had learned to move gently, a third with a rancher who needed company more than help. Watching them leave hurt in a clean, honest way. It meant the world was working again. Anna Brooks testified when asked. She did it plainly, without embellishment, her voice steady, even when her hands shook. The papers she signed returned her name to her, and the work that followed gave her something better than safety: purpose. At Cedar Ridge, she learned routines, then responsibilities. Her hair grew longer, the pale strands catching sun instead of snow. She smiled more easily. She learned when to be firm with frightened animals and when to sit on the floor and let fear drain away on its own. Dr. Laura Bennett visited often at first, checking Buddy's leg, adjusting exercises, insisting on slow progress. She had the kind of presence that filled a room without pressing on it tall, spare auburn hair, now often loose as the weather warmed, freckles deepening across her cheeks. She spoke plainly and listened longer than most. Years of mountain calls had shaped her calm. Losing a mentor during a winter rescue years ago had taught her to trust preparation over bravado. She respected Michael's boundaries without testing them. The cabin changed as spring took hold. Windows were uncovered. The radio came back to life for weather and music in the evenings. Michael fixed the warped step, replaced a hinge, planted a small line of markers along the old mining road, not to invite visitors, but to warn them. He added a low pen near the porch for Buddy, then laughed quietly the first time the puppy leapt it with clumsy pride. Training began by accident and continued by choice. Michael showed Anna how to read posture and breath, how to wait before correcting, how to reward the try rather than the outcome. He used soft commands, hands open, patience heavy with experience. Word traveled the way it always did in small places. When a search team asked for help conditioning dogs for cold terrain, Michael said yes without thinking, then surprised himself by not regretting it. He never put the uniform back on. Instead, he wore work shirts and gloves, his hands teaching what his mouth rarely explained. Buddy learned to track with his nose low and his tail steady, a natural talent refined by repetition. Michael kept sessions short, ending before fatigue could teach bad lessons. Watching Buddy work did not bring back the desert. It brought back focus. There were hard days, a late frost that threatened the pen, a night when Buddy whimpered in his sleep, and Michael sat on the floor until the sound eased. A letter that arrived months after the storm, official and impersonal, closing a file Michael had not known was open. He read it once, folded it, and fed it to the fire without ceremony. Summer edged closer. The mountains turned green in layers. Anna moved into a small place near the rescue center, visited on weekends, brought bread and stories. Laura stopped by less often now, satisfied with Buddy's progress, pleased with Michael's restraint. They talked on the porch at dusk, the air warm, the sky wide. No promises were made. None were needed. On a morning that still carried snow in the shadows, Michael stepped onto the porch with coffee steaming in his hand. Buddy sat at his side, posture alert, legs strong beneath him. They watched mist lift from the valley. The cabin stood solid behind them, not a shelter anymore, not a hiding place. A home made by choosing to stay. Michael thought about the word often home and found it had changed. It was no longer a point on a map or a door you closed against weather. It was the work you returned to, the breath you matched, the trust that grew by being kept. He reached down and scratched Buddy's chest, felt the steady thrum of life there, and smiled. Light snow began to fall, the last of the season, delicate and brief. Michael stepped off the porch. Buddy followed, paws pressing into slush that held for a moment and then let go. Their tracks ran side by side across the yard, clean and parallel, disappearing only when the ground itself decided to keep them. He did not believe the past could be erased. He believed it could be carried differently. When Michael turned back toward the cabin, Buddy trotting at his knee, the mountains were quiet, not empty, not threatening. Just quiet enough to hear what mattered. The snow was done with them. They were not done with living. Sometimes the storms that change us don't arrive to destroy our lives. They arrive to reveal what still lives inside us. Michael didn't outrun his past. He didn't erase loss or silence memory. He simply chose not to close the door when life knocked again, cold, broken, and in need. And in that choice, something quiet but powerful returned. Purpose. In everyday life, most of us aren't tested by blizzards or mountains. We're tested by smaller moments, the call we don't return, the help we hesitate to offer, the fear of being hurt again. Like Michael, we tell ourselves we're fine alone. But healing rarely comes from isolation. It comes from showing up even when we feel unready, even when the risk feels personal. This story isn't about heroes or miracles. It's about ordinary courage, the courage to care again, to protect something fragile, to believe that being needed can save us as much as saving others. Maybe your open door is listening without judgment. Maybe it's giving someone a second chance, or maybe it's finally forgiving yourself for what you couldn't change. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Leave a comment and tell us about a moment when kindness changed your life, or when you chose not to walk away. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories of resilience, loyalty, and quiet hope are waiting, because none of us are meant to face the storm alone.